Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of Double Take. Today's episode, even though it's titled Grumpy Old Men, it's not about the Jack Lemmon Walter Matthau films Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men. It's about the film Lucky from 2017, starring Harry Dean Stanton, Ron Livingston, Ed Begley Jr., Tom Skerritt, and David Lynch, directed by John Carroll Lynch, and The Straight Story from 1999, starring Richard Farnsworth, Sissy Spacek, Harry Dean Stanton, and directed by David Lynch. So these are two fairly incestuous films. There's lots of links between the two. Lucky does take perhaps a heavy influence from The Straight Story. There's one scene in particular which is almost lifted straight from The Straight Story. Both films are about independent old men who don't really want any help, but their health deteriorates, or an event in their health forces one of them to go on a journey and forces the other one to reassess their life just a tiny little bit, not a whole bunch. So the Straight Story, made in 1999. This is the David Lynch film, with the exception of maybe Dune and The Elephant Man, that when it came out, it's a U certificate, I believe. People kind of went, oh, this is a bit of an odd choice for David Lynch. But it's not really, because David Lynch, when it gets down to it, is a bit of a big softie. This is a film that tragically needs a better Blu-ray release. It was film 4 in Disney. This is a Spanish Blu-ray release that actually has permanent Spanish subtitles, and you have to actually move them off the bottom of the screen. It's a beautiful film. Richard Farnsworth was nominated for an Oscar, but for some strange reason didn't actually win it. This was his last film. He would die the year after from, I believe, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So he travels on his lawnmower to make peace with his brother Harry Dean Stanton, who they fell out years ago. It's been so long they even forget why they fell out. I have a lot of respect for Mark Kermode, the film critic, but I do disagree with him, because he said that The Straight Story was Forrest Gump on a lawnmower, which is a deep insult, because it's nowhere near that. I think it's the difference between sentimentality and making a film that's moving. There's a difference between a film that's moving and sentimental, because there is a trap where you have older actors who, after the film's released, die quite quickly after the film's released, that somehow that elevates their performance and makes the film more emotional. And to some extent that's true, but it's still a great performance by Richard Farnsworth. It's a great performance by Sissy Spacek. It's a wonderfully beautiful film. Angelo Badalamenti's score, it's a little bit unusual for him if you're used to his lush, seductive scores for David Lynch. This is a much more rural score, much more airy and bright. The film itself has wonderful points about old age. Some young people ask Richard Farnsworth's character, Alvin Strait. It's based on a true story. It was actually written by Mary Sweeney, David Lynch's long-term editor. They ask Richard Farnsworth's character, what's the worst thing about being old? And he kind of fires back, remembering when you were young. It's full of wonderful, pithy little elements. Again, I think it's a film that could have been really sentimental. It could have been TV movie of the week type material, but because Lynch has that secret sauce, he has that ability to make odd things seem normal and normal things seem odd. It just has that element that stops it from being sentimental tosh, which it could be. It's easy to be cynical about films like that. I'm cynical about a lot of films, but it's just such a beautiful little film, and underrated in Lynch's back catalogue. I mean, most people probably have seen The Straight Story, but again, it's about independence. As you get older, you sometimes lose that independence. You have to go into care homes, or your health deteriorates. You have to have people looking after you. And if you're an independent person and have been an independent person all your life, that can be difficult. Again, on this Blu-ray release, there's pretty much no extras whatsoever. This really needs an upgrade to a boutique label. So then we have Lucky, with Harry Dean Stanton in the lead role. David Lynch is an actor in the film, and he plays a character whose tortoise called Roosevelt escapes, and he's very worried about that. It's a wonderful turn by David Lynch. Again, he's such a warm, giving human being that, a lot of directors who act in films, there's always this pressure on the director, there's another director here. But David Lynch is just such a wonderful human being. That was no problem. Directed by John Carroll Lynch, who I wasn't even familiar with his name, but you'll be familiar with his face. It's his directing debut. He was Frances McDormand's husband in Fargo. He was one of the main suspects in David Fincher's Zodiac, kind of big bald guy, or big balding guy. So it's his directing debut, and again, it's just a wonderful film. Harry Dean Stanton plays the title character Lucky, who's a bit irascible, independent. There's this running theme how he was kicked out of another bar because he lit a cigarette inside the bar. He's a regular at this other bar. There's a regular cast of characters. He's known around the town. It's a tiny town. Again, this is a film very much like The Straight Story. Again, heavily influenced by The Straight Story, I would say. But it's more also a love letter to Harry Dean Stanton. The script writers kind of spent time with him. They kind of wrote it with him in mind, wrote it as kind of a thank you to him. He was always kind of a difficult character to work with. He was kind of layer focused. He wasn't really interested in extraneous things. Sadly, he would die just after or before this was actually released. The extras in this disc are really good. There's about a 20-minute conversation with John Carroll Lynch where he has some wonderful Harry Dean Stanton anecdotes. It includes Sophie Huber's 2012 documentary Harry Stanton Partly Fiction, which is about 80 minutes as well, which features David Lynch, Wim Wenders, Chris Christopherson, and Debbie Harry, and there's an interview with the writers, producers Logan Sparks and Drago Somonja. and there is a booklet. So I would highly recommend these two films. Lucky is wonderfully moving. It's about living in the moment. Dean Stanton gives another wonderful performance. There's a moment near the end of the film where, again, if you're cynical, you might not like. But for me, because the film is not autobiographical in Harry Dean Stanton, but his persona, it's more of, it is a love letter to Harry Dean Stanton, it's a thank you to Harry Dean Stanton. And when you think of what Harry Dean Stanton meant to a lot of film fans, from his Repo Man turn to Paris, Texas, he's worked with David Lynch, so many other roles. I did actually find it profoundly moving at the end. The scene, which I think was inspired by the Straight Story, is wonderful too. Tom Skerritt has a war veteran who's sitting in the diner, and they strike up Harry Dean Stanton and Tom Skerritt. And there's two members of the Nostromo crew, who obviously we sadly lost Yaphet Kotto recently as another Nostromo member. They have a conversation and they swap war stories, which is very similar to the scene in The Straight Story in the bar, where Richard Farnsworth character talks to a war veteran. Both scenes are so well done. There's no swelling music, there's no kind of accentuated emotion. It's just wonderfully done, and again quite moving. It's beautifully directed by John Carroll Lynch. He just lets things sit. You know, it takes its own time, it takes its own pace. You can understand why certainly Lucky wasn't a box office success. I don't think Straight Story was either, because we don't really see films about old people that much. Certainly not old people and dealing with mortality. Harry Dean Stanton has a wonderful speech near the end of the film, which is just wonderfully done. They're both beautifully acted films. Again, you can be cynical about them, but I think you just have to go with them, and I think you'll find both of them genuinely moving experiences, not sentimental. Like I said, the choices of music, Lynch goes for a Badalamenti score, Carroll goes for some score, but he's also got like a Johnny Cash song. Harry Dean Stanton also has a musical number which is quite beautiful. Yeah, this isn't about grumpy old men who change. They're still grumpy, they're still irascible, but they both suffer falls. That spurs Alvin Straight on to go across the country to make peace with his brother, which is a great turn by Harry Dean Stanton in The Straight Story, even though he's only in it for a couple of minutes. And in Lucky, the fall that Lucky has kind of makes him think about the end a little bit more. But again, it doesn't change him. That's not the classic Hollywood, oh, here's a grumpy character, but something happens and he changes and he's an amazing human being now. They're not those kind of films. But what they are beautifully shot, beautifully acted, quiet little films that don't make a lot of noise, don't get a lot of publicity, but should be treasured. and adored the way Richard Farnsworth and Harry Dean Stanton will always be. They are no longer with us, but they'll always be with us for their amazing work, because that's the thing, we are all walking time bombs. Life can be taken away from us at any moment, so you should watch great films. You should watch Harry Dean Stanton and Richard Farnsworth in these two great films. So thanks very much for watching on that bombshell that we're all going to die and be nothing. Please join me again for another double take. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying stay safe.